acknowledge our robot friend. Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. And it's still light here in California for a little while anyway. I wish I could send you all some of the blue clouds and puffy clouds and blue skies that I have out here. So we're going to play with photographs today in a bunch of different ways. So hopefully you have some photographic material of some kind. I'm going to show a wide variety of different photographic material you might work with, everything from your own personal photographs to found photographs in different ephemera to things as mundane as a photograph in the newspaper, and also some interesting kind of stretch techniques that we'll play with for a little bit today. Okay. So that's a little preview of coming attractions. I'm going to be working in the Fall ArtJournalSnacks journal, as well as another one that's exactly the same as that one, as well as my little art journal that I created with the single pad of paper that I showed a little while ago on Mix. So let's go over to the desk and we'll get started. So here's how my fall journal is evolving, and this one's actually getting really full, which is a good thing. But since we are demoing different things, it's kind of complicated because this one's filling up a lot faster than maybe I thought that it would. So we're going to go to one of these pages that I folded the other day. You may remember this from previous live streams. And feels like this is just begging to be something. So we're actually going to start with a photograph that I found in the newspaper. This was a piece of newspaper that was wrapping a piece of art that I bought this weekend. And I just cut part of it. So one of the things that's fun about photographs that don't necessarily have any personal meaning to them, they're not like a family heirloom, is you can feel free to cut and edit it however you see fit. So this photo looks like 4 little boys. They're all looking that way. Looks like in front of an old general store, and they seem to be dressed up. And the context of this photo, from what I could gather from the newspaper, is it was a kind of recreation, frontier California gold rush kind of a like amusement park that's closing. So I'm not sure how old the photograph itself is here, but it's, it's hard to tell because maybe they're in costumes, or maybe this is what they were actually wearing. So I kind of crinkled the newspaper picture up to, again, accentuate some of those old vibes. And I am going to take just a wax crayon, and I'm just going to rub it on there a little bit just to distress it a tiny bit more, not a lot, just to add a little bit of color. Have to be careful when you play with newsprint, right? Because it is a little bit fragile, especially if it's an older piece of newspaper. And thinking about where to put it with these folded pages. If I put it here, it's kind of this fun reveal, but if I put it here, then the photo will kind of appear as I open this page. So, sorry, comics. I'm going to cover over these comics on the back side. So one of the first things to think about when you are placing a photograph in your art journal is the composition, like where is it going to live? And what parts of it are going to be visible? So mine's going to go off the page a little bit here. I'm going to lose a little bit of the top of this building. I think that's okay. Now, this piece of newspaper has some lines in it that I thought would be kind of fun to continue. So I'm going to take a little bit of the India ink that we've been playing with in this box, and I'm just going to use the end like we've been doing. And there's, I think there's maybe shadows in the original photograph, but I'm just going to extend them out this way, a little bigger. And so we have balcony there on that building. And then it looks to me like maybe some trees here in the background. So I'm just going to extend this photograph a little bit, not trying to recreate what was there, but rather continuing, what do I want to say, like the spirit of the original image. So a thing to note about the India ink onto the newsprint is if you use it full force, it'll bleed a little bit, but not as much as if you add water to it. So I know we've been adding water to the ink in other contexts, but when you're going over the newsprint, you want to just use it full strength. But over here, when I'm away from the newsprint, I can add some water. I'm going to blend a little bit of this tree, a little more tree-like over here. And then the paper from the newsprint, right? It's got that newsprint color. It's not a bright white. So in this little container, which I really love to use when I'm art journaling, I like to get these little cheapo containers. They have a brush in the lid. And what's nice about them is it's a little easier to work quickly. So this one has gray acrylic along with a little bit of matte medium to ease the flow of it as I'm using it, make it fast to apply. This is starting to make it so that it's a little harder to tell where the edge of the newspaper is and where the page in the art journal begins. So another thing that I like to think about when I'm working, when I start with an image, is if and where there might be some space for writing. And there's a spot that's kind of starting to evolve as I work on this page, which is this line right here. This nice straight line extending, looks like from where the building meets the street there. And I'm wondering if that might end up being an interesting spot to do a little journaling. We'll see. Then the other nice thing about journaling on that page is it would be more hidden from the rest of the page itself. I'm going to come to this side now, and I'm going to start kind of messy with the gray. And you can see here in this part where I'm putting it on that it has been thinned down, right? This is not straight gray acrylic paint. I'm going to kind of go over this edge here with this fourth little boy, because in the original image, he was holding something that I didn't particularly want in my art journal. So you might be able to guess with the context of the photograph. So I cut it out and ripped it off. And kind of a fun thing again about using photographs and photographic material that aren't personal, because you can be the editor. Let me take that wax crayon I was using, and here I'm mostly using it. You've seen me do this before, using the crayon as a scratching tool. Add a little texture in there. And that texture, once it's dried, will be a really interesting place. Maybe add more ink or some other media. A bit of that over here. Here, a little bit of that blue will show through. And now this line, I think I do want to make a place for writing. Now the danger with getting one very nice thin line like that for writing on is with this tool, you're not going to get it perfect. Now, if you're a person that feels very strongly about having nice straight lines to write on, break out a ruler. In fact, I noticed today when I was poking around on the ArtSnacks shop that one of my favorite little tiny baby rulers is there. So if you don't have a good tiny journaling desk ruler, highly recommend it. You can ask Lee or I about it later. I love that little ruler. Again, using the crayon as a mark making tool just to spread some of this ink around, help it dry a little faster. And when I do this, when I make like a space for writing, I don't necessarily have a plan yet for what I'm going to write about. I just want to give myself that option. And frankly, sometimes it just ends up being lines, and I don't end up writing anything at all. Okay, so I have this little piece that I pulled off, and I really like the peak of that building. I think I want to find a way to incorporate it in. So I'm just going to cut very carefully around that part. I'm going to leave the other part with the ribbed edge. So once this part is dry, I'll probably go back over the top of that with a little matte medium just to seal it down a little bit. But I like that better now that there's kind of an echo of the building. And when this is closed, you'll get like a little preview of what's to come. Go for a tiny bit more. I feel like I want a little bit more of that blue in here. You can see it smearing the black ink. Again, this is like why I like to use so many different types of materials in my journal, because it's these little things that you couldn't possibly plan that happen that just end up being really interesting to me. Interesting textures that happen the more that you make marks on a page. So I'm gonna let this dry because that needs a little bit of time to dry out. And I have another little friend here. So this is a much fancier image that we're going to play with next. So this is the same journal as our ArtJournalSnacks journal. This is just I call it my auxiliary journal, my auxiliary fall journal. And I found a book this weekend that's about jaguars, but it has lots of other animals in it as well. And it has this beautiful image of an iguana. And one of the things that I was thinking about when I was looking at it is how rich and black this background is, which I thought would play really well with the India ink. And then I knew that I had this page that has some of these painterly colors that the iguana has. So for right now, I'm just going to cut it out just as it is. And we don't get the iguana's entire little, you want to say like hand? I want to call it a hand because how iguanas move, but it's a little foot. And just have it here framed on the page. So there's kind of the decision when you have a page like this where you've done a little bit of mixed media work already, is deciding like, what do I want to cover and what am I going to be sad if I cover it up? And I like to just look at it for a moment and decide, like, am I okay with losing some of this other texture in here? Is there a way that I can crop this a little more and still have the iguana? And I think the answer is yes, because I'm going to hold on to this other piece. So we'll set that piece aside for the moment. And now we keep a little more of this turquoise acrylic on this page. Now, the other thing you could do, and this is kind of a fun thing with photographs, and I'm doing it with an animal right now, but you can certainly do it with a human or an object, is to cut not exactly on the edge of the thing, but just kind of cutting out around it with a little bit of a border. So we'll put the iguana there, and then have this piece, right, that fits in there. And there's a couple things you could do. You could offset it a lot, knowing that it's, you're still following the shape of the edge of this thing. You could also decide to go along there and trim, just barely, trim a little tiny bit of it away. So let's glue this part on first. And we'll go to that next step. Give myself a little bit of a border there. I think I do want to do this trim here. So kind of fiddly work. They're detail scissors that are made just for art. I also find like this, these are quilting scissors. So they're very sharp and they have a really nice, precise point. Sometime we should do maybe something on mix about cutting tools. I have very strong feelings about safety scissors in particular, but strong feelings about cutting tools. All right. So now you can see that we can get this a little closer to the iguana because we cut out that one thing. Now I'm not going to get it, I'm not going to put it exactly right. There's something visually about having it be not quite what you're expecting, right? So just slightly off, which is also kind of a good permission slip for yourself to not be perfect. There are plenty of places in our lives where we have to get things exactly right and totally precise, and our art journals are not one of them. So give yourself permission to have it be slightly askew. And then I have this wonderful little pattern, which is the part that I cut out. And it's kind of this interesting, almost like a line that I can lift up and move around. And decide. So I put it here, again, it's kind of echoing that same pattern, but I wonder if it might be more interesting to put it somewhere else. I think the answer is yes. Sometimes I have to look at things for a little while to make a decision, and sometimes the decision is clear. So with a little tiny detail thing like this, I find it helpful to just stick it down on one end and then kind of trace your finger along it as you go. And you can see me here practicing what I said about not trying to be perfect. Originally, I think in my head, I had that going all the way to the edge, but that is fine because we're going to switch to a black brush pen. And I'm going to run my pen right along the edge of this paper line, letting it get thicker in some spots and thinner in others. And this journal page, while it was drying, was held together by, or separated from itself with a piece of wax paper. So you can see it resists a tiny bit there. This third line get a little bit wilder. You really see where the resist is happening in that one. So maybe I could even continue over here with that same idea. So you can see now that this photograph pulled out of a book is really starting to live on the page and look less like something that was just cut out and stuck there. Right? This is kind of one of the ways that an art journal, including photographs, is different from a scrapbook. Right? There's nothing wrong with scrapbooks. Scrapbooks are wonderful. I did that for many years. Nerd alert, I was also editor-in-chief of my yearbook. So I'm big into, you know, squares with photographs right next to each other, but not in my art journal. I like it to be more part of the composition and not stuck down on top. And that might be something that some of you have experienced, where you like have a photograph and you want to incorporate it in and you stick it in there, and then it looks like, well, now what do I do? You know, do I just put a frame around this? And then it just doesn't quite live on the page. So thinking about how your journal might live on the page. So we're going to get a little bit, not super messy, but a little bit messy now. Take my dropper. Has anyone had a water fight with their droppers yet? Should let us know in the chat. I haven't, but as I'm doing it right now, I'm thinking that would be really fun. I'm sure in like chemistry labs or biology labs, they probably do. Little pipette water fight. Don't do it with India ink. That would probably be a bad idea. Okay, so I've got some watered down ink in there, and I'm going to take this flat brush. And now I'm going to use it in its watered down format, again, because I know that what is on this page already will resist in some places. So it's going to help me build up the texture that's already on this page. And also help me incorporate my little iguana friend a little more into the image. So I really like to explore the different ways of using a tool. When I pick something up, using it more than one way. So if I'm drawing with something, what happens if I turn it on its side? If I'm using something as a brush, what happens if I tap it instead? It can be helpful to be asking and asking and asking yourself, I wonder, or what happens if, when you're using art materials. And that's the good thing about doing this in an art journal is, again, it's a little lower stakes. What happens if? And if you don't like it, you can cover it up. You can keep going. You can try something else. Not that you can't do that on a canvas or a nice piece of paper, but it just feels a little bit more approachable, I suppose, to be experimental in your art journal. So you can see that turquoise is really going to resist the ink. So I'm going to go right up to that edge there because I know it's going to, the acrylic is very thick in that spot. So it's really going to pop. And more closely mirror the texture of this iguana. So since my iguana also has these round, more organic shapes on its skin, the scales, I'm going to build in a little bit of that. And I'm varying how much ink I have on the brush as I'm doing this so that I can get a variety of different types of marks. And once you start engaging in a process like this, it gets a little bit, you can get lost in it. It'll mesmerizing, shouldn't be finding. So now we have this little section here of the iguana. I'm going to actually cut this up a little bit and cut these into some circular shapes. This is why a lot of art journaling in the way that I practice is it's a little, I love to journal outside, but it can be hard to hold on to all these little pieces. So only good practice for certain materials. Ceiling fans are also problematic. Get maybe one more that'll go out of it. I'm going to hold on to this piece here because it might come in handy. And then I like the way that these circular pieces can then play against the square brush strokes over on this side. Sometimes I use my glue as the means to hold something else onto the page. I was just thinking, darn, I wish I had something that is not here on my desk right now, but then I turned my head and I saw this, so it will work nicely. The palette pen. Using palette pens are great because they'll go right over the black that's setting. Wow. All right. So this page is coming along. One of the things that I might incorporate into this is the part that I cut off of that book. Because there's something in here that just cracks me up. They're describing a different lizard, so not the iguana. They're describing the anole lizard. Which, fun fact, you used to be able, this kind of goes back to the first image we were working with from that frontier fair kind of amusement park, but used to be able to apparently go to like a county fair and get a little anole lizard on a little tiny chain with a little clip on the end, and you would clip it onto your jacket or your sweater or whatever as your accessory for the day. And then you could take it home. That's part of why anole lizards have naturalized in a lot of places. But this is talking about the anoles. They are all much of a size, suggesting there is an optimal size for an anole. And then it talks about on different islands, there are different sizes. The minimum size difference is a ratio of 1 to 3, or sorry, 1 to 1.3. Anything less than this appears unsustainable, presumably because the two species then compete for the same size insect. And it just seems like such a extra poetic way of describing these lizards. And it also goes on to describe elegant, slim lizards. And then it talks about the green iguana being the gentle green giant, and that it travels well. So it's just delightful to me, these descriptions. So I might find a way to incorporate some of the text from this into this page. Okay, but we've got a little wet ink here, so I'm going to set this one aside. And I wanted to show you something. So this is not ephemera hour, but I have a little Polaroid ephemera here. So I wanted to talk about photographic fails. Now, some of you that have boxes of old photos may have things like this, where maybe the film got exposed, maybe it was in a weird temperature, and there's kind of this weird thing happening here with the Polaroid chemicals. And normally this would be the kind of thing that people would toss, but it can, and I think I was trying to take a self-portrait. I think that maybe is the top of my head right there. But obviously this one failed. But that doesn't mean we can't play with this as something in a journal. So Polaroid, you just kind of have to experiment, like what's going to land on here. And the watered down ink is going to move around quite a bit. But if I start to play with it with some other stuff, the wax will actually kind of help the ink sit on the surface. So I really, really love photography. I love weird old cameras. I have a bunch of strange cameras that do weird things. And, you know, Polaroid film is not cheap. So when you have a fail, a photographic fail, what can you turn it into? Because this shape, this thing itself, the Polaroid, is a pretty recognizable thing. Although I guess I wonder, maybe younger generations have less of an attachment to this, for people that aren't nerds like me. But I really love the shape of the Polaroid and what it connotes. So I have a newspaper transfer text here. Just gonna stick that on there. And then this becomes something that I can tuck into my art journal and play with some more. So that's one way to play with a fail, and you can incorporate it into your journal in different ways. Okay, so here's another one. This one is not quite a fail. It's got some kind of an image on there, but it's hard to tell what it is. It might be, I'm looking out my window right now, it might be looking at the barn that's right outside my window, but it's almost like this ghost image. So with something like this, it can be fun to use it as a spot to write. So again, making a place for yourself that can later become
spot to write. So a Polaroid captures a moment in time. So you can think about it as a spot to capture something you're thinking or feeling right now. I'm thinking right now that I am glad to be trusted with stories. That's something that I love about my work as an art therapist and the work that I've gotten to do with you all. So much story sharing that's happened through the sharing of our art journal pages and connecting with each other, and I'm very grateful for that. So this can then get incorporated into my art journal as well. Okay. So we'll look at these now. So the other thing you can do with Polaroids is Polaroid transfer. And I showed this on my personal Instagram and then reposted it to the ArtJournalSnacks, the process of doing these. This is where you peel away that plastic top layer and then float the image itself onto watercolor paper. So this is one of the watercolor papers that I got from Watercolor Snacks. And it's a smooth finish. So the image ends up being very crisp on there. And one of the things that's fun about Polaroid transfers is getting those interesting little wrinkles in. So there's the barn that's right outside my window. Images of some oak leaves. This one, I love how this one came out. One of them didn't come out quite as well. So I took 2 pictures of these leaves. This one had 2 leaves in it, but the other one didn't quite work. This one came out really beautifully. Very fall-like, right? Here's my hand with a leaf. Paddleboard, self-portrait. Sorry about my nose. And another self-portrait that kind of failed. So I wanted to play with that one now. Let's see what the guys aside. So a cool thing about doing Polaroid transfers, and I'd be happy to later, I'll link to a little tutorial on how to do this. Pretty easy, a lot easier than I thought it was. I think I've talked about this before, but kind of neat to leave, like I did with the iguana photo, leave a little bit of that edge because then I can use that in my journal. It's also a little easier to stick something down if it doesn't have a lot of tiny little details if it's on thicker paper. Something you're probably learning as you've been playing with all the different ephemera that you get as part of ArtJournalSnacks is that some things are more difficult than others to glue in, right? And some things are more difficult than others to get them to stay put. So let's find a spot for this. Let's start with a new page. And this will fit really nicely into this journal because of the size of it. But it feels, I don't know, it feels a little bit weird to me to just put this white background thing onto a white page. I almost want to do something else first. I think I'm going to wait a moment and do this first. Also, because moving this watered down Indian ink around on paper is just super satisfying. Sure, many of you have experienced that. How satisfying it can be. Just watch that ink move around. It kind of separates a little differently than an acrylic ink does, and differently than a watercolor ink. In fact, I've got a little watercolor ink right here, this gray. And you can see what that does when you put it onto the India ink. And you can also see the difference between something that's a little more warm and something that's a little more cool. There's like little tiny particles in the India ink. But I've now created something impossible for myself. It's very wet. Okay. Put this over here to dry. And it looks like we can come back to this one now. So this is mostly dry. I'm actually thinking now that I look at this, I wonder if this one about stories might fit in here. This one. The look and feel of this one with the heart actually feels like it fits better, probably because I used that same crayon on this one. We could actually also put it here. And the nice thing about putting it here is it kind of has this newspaper to newspaper connection. And it tells you what might be inside. I think I'll do that. There's also the nice benefit of the failure of this photograph. The kind of yellow, rusty, orange color matches with the watercolor that's already on this page. I like how that looks. In fact, maybe I want to play that up a little bit. Adding a little bit of orange on this. See how satisfying that is? That interesting texture that can happen. You can use the matte medium that we got in this box and just mix a little bit of acrylic paint into it to get a toned medium, and then scratch back into it with anything. In this case, I used a crayon, so I got nice thick lines, but you can also use a pencil. You could use a fork, all sorts of different things. Yeah, the medium wasn't quite dry, but I can go back in later and do something there. So I want to blend this one in a little more. Help it start to connect to this other page. So with the fold out pages that we made last time, I like to think about every stage of them connecting to the next. So like this being a composition and this being a composition, all of them talking to each other or informing each other or being part of the evolving story of the journal. I'm keeping my eye on that other journal that has a pretty big puddle on it right now. I think what I'll do. Dump my puddle on there. We'll dry a little more quickly now. This page. So this one, because it has those yellows in it, I wonder about one of these into it. I can cut it a little bit so it'll fit better. I think this is another place where playing with photos in your art journal, feel free to cut them apart. When you think about, your family photos, a lot of times they're kind of just in square rectangular format, just like marching their way along inside an album. I guess I like it better there, huh? Bringing that into the gray. So I'm going to cover that up, and I really like that. So I'm going to change my mind. Working in this journal is like trying to post panoramic photos on Instagram. And I have another little bit of newspaper text that I found. This is from a section in the newspaper that's about things that have been overheard. Some of you may remember there was a blog like way, way back called Overheard in New York. And then I think they were overheard in a bunch of other cities. So the New York one was especially funny. I lived there at the time, so I was really enjoying it because I knew all the landmarks they were talking about, like overheard on the L train. Okay, so this one says, I don't think this small reality is the whole reality. A fun thing. Coming out of flat surfaces. So this is still pretty darn wet. So while that is drying, I'm just going to let it stick together. I wanted to show you a few other things and talk about some other photographic techniques that you might incorporate into your art journal. Okay, so here's one. This one, you saw me create this little envelope last time, but I added the confidential stamp and I added some writing onto my little inside piece. And then I added this photograph. Now, a couple things, you may have seen the fun, relatively inexpensive thermal printers that you can get, that you can Bluetooth and send photographs from your phone directly to these little thermal printers. You can get sticker material for them. But a thing to know about this if you're incorporating it into your art journal, and it's less of a problem this time with our thicker pages in the fall journal. It is a thing to be aware of, though, that you should not use any solvent-based or alcohol-based materials next to this. So this means no alcohol inks, no Sharpie markers. Just be really careful about what goes next to that because it'll mess with the thermal printing. So this is just watercolor next to this one, but it's a fun way to incorporate little photos in. I like the way it's kind of little ghost-like, very vintage looking. I took this picture the other day, so it's not an old photo, but it has more of that feel. And then this is another example. This was a photograph that I took inside the vintage store, the organic produce market that's next to the vintage store. You can see where my mind goes. Where can I get ephemera? But it's of these beautiful mushrooms, and then I drew one of the mushrooms kind of coming out of the photograph. So the way the print works, it again has this kind of old ghostly quality to it. And then on this page, I also added some text from a biology textbook about mushrooms and the Latin name of that particular mushroom. Here's another page I wanted to show you, just to kind of show how barn images can be very different, right? This is this barn, and here's another photograph of this barn. So the type of photograph you use has a very different feel. This one has much more of a old vintage look to it. These ones, which were taken with a little zinc printer, also Polaroid, have a much more bright color to them. They're a little bit more, these look a lot more modern, whereas this looks like something I maybe pulled out of an old drawer, even though I just did this yesterday. Okay, that same barn, totally different view. It's also fun sometimes to take photographs of yourself and just incorporate those in. So I took the other day and just did a little bit of ink on that page. Okay, let's see how our drying is going back there. So I can show you this piece. This is a little piece of the Polaroid transfer process that didn't work. A little bit of river there that kind of peeled off from another image. So it found a home too. There. Interesting. So sticking those pages together ended up with a pretty cool process. I'm actually going to use, because this is thick paper and I'm going to stick it onto something that's a little bit wet. I'm going to use a little bit of tacky glue, a lot of tacky glue. Institutional hazard of flipping through art journal pages. Sometimes a little pigment goes from one place to another, if that's okay. We'll make it work. Stick that in. And I'm going to let it be a little bit lifted up on this page so that I can go in later and add some interesting textures where the edge of this meets the black page of the book. And there was something inside here. This is from the inside of the film. Oh, there it is. There was some text in here that I just thought, again, kind of looking for text that means something to you when you take it out of context and put it into your own context. So this is from the inside of the Polaroid film container. It says, hold on, a moment makes all the difference. Every time you take a Polaroid photo, you put hundreds of chemicals into action. So it can take a while for the photo to fully develop. While you wait, you can frame another shot. Take some time to think, but make sure you keep checking back because before long, your image will appear, a physical memory to have and to hold and to share too. What develops after the photo is up to you. And when I saw this yesterday, I just thought, well, that's kind of the perfect message to go with what we're up to. This idea of moment and taking a photo and making it your own, putting it into the context of your art journal and having the photo help you tell a story, whether that's a photo of yourself or somewhere that you love to go or friends and family or pets or totally random. That photo, once you put it into your art journal, it becomes part of your story.
Hey, Erin, this is Lee. We got about a half hour left in the session.
Okay. Thank you. Just want to show one more thing with this, and then what I would like to do is have people share. So start to think about whether and if you'd like to share, and then if we have time, we'll come back. But one thing I did want to show with this was I'm going to use the pipette and get a little of this watered down ink. And I thought that text at the beginning, hold on, was one that resonated a lot with me right now. But lots of big things going on in my world, so I need to play with that a little bit. And to make sure that this ink kind of remains readable as it flows around, I'm just going to go over it with a pencil. And what that's doing is it's digging into the surface of the paper, giving the ink somewhere to settle. So even if it gets blurry, it'll still be readable text later.
So let's let that dry for a little bit and see if anyone would like to share. And then we can come back and play a little more.
So if you'd like to share, you can raise your digital hand or your physical hand. And I'll scan the audience and see if everyone.
And I'm taking a look at the chat, and yes, Lee, that's the ruler I was talking about.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I figured it was. We featured that recently. We have, I think, one or two other rulers that are very similar, but I feel like the way you described it was like an everyday carry type of item.
Yeah.
Erin, I don't see anyone's hand up, so they're probably working.
No problem. I'm just trying to grab a piece of the sun right here.
Oh, unless Dana has a hand. She looks like she has a top-down view. Yes, her hand is up. Dana, if you want to share, you can turn on your microphone. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh gosh, I'm a nervous wreck. I'm not very good at this. I did have a question though, actually. There's a page I was working on earlier today. And if you can see this.
Yeah.
I glued across the single image and this single image kind of across the crease.
Yes.
And I ended up with this creasing here.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if that can be fixed or if you have tips for how to not do that.
That's a great question. I think I have, see if I can turn this page, an example to show you of where that happened to me. Yes. Okay. So that happened to me yesterday. Was yesterday Sunday? Yes. Yesterday I was art journaling while I was teaching, and I wasn't paying a lot of attention to what I was like the precision of my gluing, shall we say, and it's kind of thin paper. So with magazine paper or paper that's from like textbooks, which is what this is from, one of the things that can be really helpful when you're gluing across what we call the gutter in a book, which is across where the fold is to put a lot of extra glue in that part. So sometimes I'll put glue on the back of the thing that I'm gluing in, and I'll also take my glue stick or my brush with glue on it and put it right into that spot. And then if you start there, so start in the center and kind of crease your thumb along that center line and then work out to either side from there. That said, you can also accentuate that. So you have that image that's got kind of the lines there. What if you took colored pencil, wax crayon, something, and accentuated that and made it look almost like that wrinkle is on purpose, right? So there really aren't mistakes in art journals. You can find a way to make it look almost then like this isn't from a magazine. This is something old and wonderful that I pulled from some secret place.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. That's great. I'm going to do that.
Good.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. If there's anyone else that wants to share or have a question, go for it.
Okay. I'm going to move that one back to the side. I'm looking for the page and one working together. Okay. So here's our iguana. And here's kind of an example that's a little bit related to what Dana was talking about. This is where I put So there's kind of the difficulty either way. If you have something like a photograph from a magazine and you cross that gutter, you will end up most of the time with a little bit of roughness there. And unless you're using tissue paper or something that you can really, really stick down with matte medium, it's really hard to get like a perfect line across there. Okay, so you can play with that again to kind of make it look like this is on purpose, right? So this is a magazine page. This is that same gray mixed in with matte medium I was using. This is a little straight acrylic paint here. And I'm now going to go in and use some of the colors that are in that photograph and some of the colors that are in this this was packaging. And it was so strange that I felt like, I think I talked about this on Ephemera Hour. Like it was so strange that I just felt like it needed to be in here. I made an ink page back here that I'll do something with. But the sky in this photograph is actually reminding me a lot of this, like what it looks like from the vantage point of my paddleboard. So sometimes pairing something you find in a magazine with something that you've created yourself or that has an importance in your life can be a fun way to work with a page. And originally with this, I was planning on like weaving something into it and making it very static, but kind of like the idea of it just being loose. And I also, when I was sticking it in, this happened, like this beautiful texture under here, and I don't want to lose that. Get kind of attached to these interesting textures that happen in my art journal. And as I'm cutting this out, I'm realizing I don't know that we've talked about this term before from using photographs, but it's kind of a funny term that people use in the altered book world and like the vintage ephemera world. Instant ancestors. And this is when you find a photograph that you don't really have any personal attachment to, an old photograph in a vintage shop or a thrift store, and they become your instant ancestors. And it can be kind of fun to create whole worlds for those instant ancestors and maybe stories too. Okay, so here's my paddleboard. I'm going to have some other things from past ephemera that seem like they want to be in here. You might be wondering why I'm just squeezing it directly onto the art journal. And side note, that is what I usually do. I don't normally put things onto palettes. I normally just like go right onto the page itself. Try to contain myself a little bit when we're doing a live class because it can get pretty messy pretty fast. Well, I do see I was smart this time and I put my trusty wax paper very close. Didn't do that last time, it's not a problem. I like the way that the texture of this sits over the top of the ink onto that paper. And then this,
Erin, sorry to interrupt. Rodney has a question. He said, "Love those scissors. What brand is it?"
oh, which ones? The pink ones? Oh, the gray ones? Acme Titanium. How's that? So let me show you something a little different. Okay, so these pink ones are by, I won't undermine the company, but these are like craft scissors. Okay, so you can see maybe just in looking, they're kind of flimsy. See how this part is here? It looks like I could probably, with enough elbow grease, kind of snap those apart. Got my initials on there for times that I've taken these scissors places. Do they cut details? Yes, but they're not awesome. Now see the way the tip, we're gonna do scissors today, but see the way the tip is on these? These are quilting scissors, meant for cutting out small sewing details. So you can even see, use my left hand, but I wish you could hear the sound, because these make a much more satisfying sound. These ones work, they're perfectly good for cutting things, but the quilting scissors work a whole lot better. Now, my great grandmother is absolutely rolling over right now to think about me using quilting scissors to cut paper, and goodness knows what else I cut, but really is a good solution if you want to get nice, satisfying, stable cuts in what you're doing. Thanks for asking. And sometime I'm going back to the studio this weekend. I'll try to remember to take a picture. I've got some pretty cool, like old vintage scissors that I could show y'all. Okay. Just call for a little wax paper in here. So if I'm gonna turn the page on something that is a little irregular, I just kind of do the best that I can. Want to keep this from sticking. And there's a little bit here that I think that the paint can kind of help to fill in. So when you're using photographs, whether they're from magazines or they're actual photographs, looking at the colors and finding ways to use those colors in other places on the page can help it blend in, right? Especially if you're taking like a couple different photos, right? Like maybe 2 different people, and you want to make it look like they're in the same world. Look at what other colors are there and use those colors to help connect the images. Interesting, because this color of this sky is kind of what I'm seeing out my window right now. Present moment. Pulling all this used wax paper out too. I have one other photo I wanted to show. This is another one from a science textbook, and it's a photograph of a fossil. And I thought that was kind of neat because it's like, in some ways, a fossil is like like nature's Polaroid. Like really going into the nerdy photo stuff today, but kind of an interesting thing. And then there's a little bit of green here, and I am not sure what that is doing in this photo, because it doesn't seem to make sense with what else is happening in here. And there wasn't an illustration on the page of the book, so I have no idea what those little green things are there for, but I'm going to play up that color a little bit. The other nice thing is the brown that's in there is a lot like the quinacridone pigment that's on this paper. Another thing my great grandmother would not want me to cut out, and I'm actually realizing as I'm about to cut this really would have been a great thing to go in with the iguana, but
do this anyway. Mimic the shape of these ferns, but in green. So looking at your photographs, you can kind of, if you squint your eyes at them and look at the shapes, and then find other materials that can replicate those shapes in some way. And again, always saving your cutoffs, so they might turn into something interesting. Good a time as any to talk about this part. Hopefully you haven't had too many problems so far, but if it does come up, you can see it happening right now. So again, this is thin paper from a science textbook, and you can see as I'm going over and over it with the matte medium, kind of rough, it's getting these little wrinkles in it. For me, that's desirable. I want that. However, if it's a photograph of your like 3-year-old self, maybe you don't want wrinkles. So thinking about what materials you're using, how you're sticking them down, and then what else you're treating them with. In this case, with the fossilized ferns, the wrinkles actually add to this whole theme of this page and the experience of this page. But if it's, again, like a photograph of a small child or somewhere you don't necessarily want wrinkles, think about what the paper is. Is it thin paper? Is it old paper? And if so, you maybe don't want to go over the top with something very wet. Like this matte medium is pretty liquidy. So it's prone to causing wrinkles in like thin old paper like that. Again, I think that's working in this case. A little bit more of the interesting paper in. So here's what I talked about before, going into the gutter first and then working away from it. And that's also a lot of thinner material, so it's going to work a little better. I'm not sure what the confidential stamp has to do with this fossilized fern, but the answer will come. And it doesn't, sometimes your pages are just for the fun of making them and they don't need to mean something. That might sound kind of strange for an art therapist to say, but sometimes it's just about the satisfaction of creating, and it doesn't necessarily have any kind of a discernible story. Or maybe it does, but you'll figure it out later. Okay. Pretty fun. I'm not 100% sure that's going to stick there on the edges, but I can always come back later and add more. So let's come back to this one briefly, and I'll show you where the pencil line is. You see how that now has allowed the ink to settle in. As this ink is drying, it's settling into where I put those pencil lines. You can also see where the lines that I drew with the dropper tip of the watercolor ink, and I kind of incise into the paper, and there's some line work there as well. So once this is totally dry, I'll probably come back in with another material and just kind of disappear these edges a little bit, help them look like it's not just sitting on the surface of this page. but we'll see. We'll see what happens. There, try not to make ink go everywhere. And I think the last thing that I'll do on this page is I've got these little bits that came from the iguana page. And since iguanas have such direct connection to dinosaurs, it seems like they ought to go in here with this fossilized fern also. And this is one of those things that's, I'm doing this now because we're towards the end, and it's okay if my fingers just get irreparably sticky. It's really hard to put stick glue onto something that has a bunch of holes in it. It's probably a job for matte medium, but I'll come back to it later and do that. All right. It looks like we have about 9 minutes, and I want to see if anyone has a burning desire to share.
Anybody? Anybody?
People seem to still be working. I'm going to show you something I'm going to do that's a total experiment, and we'll see what happens. I realized that the ink on this Polaroid is just kind of, see how it's just sitting on the surface? Now, if I was using a traditionally printed photograph, the ink from that pen probably would have sunk in a little better. In this case, I can see that it's just sitting on the surface. You can see a little spot there where my fingerprint is in. So I'm going to do something maybe kind of weird, and we'll see what happens. I'll post it later on Mix, but I would really like to use this Polaroid in my art journal, and there are other things I could do, but I'm kind of curious what might happen if I put the tacky glue over top of this and let it dry. I'll have to report back tomorrow morning. See what happens. I'm just gonna cover over all the ink. This is like the thing that you always wanted to do when you were little and get in trouble for squeezing out so much glue. So I've got most of my ink covered. Any of the spots that it's still sticking out after that dries, I can move that around a little bit. And we will let that be. Let's see what happens. I think last little step on this page is going to be to really play up some more of that fern look. So with this ink tool, remembering again to kind of turn it in the direction that you want the lines to go, so that it, especially if you're doing something like leaves, which it's been fun to see in the mixed community how many people have been playing with leaves in various ways, which feels appropriate, right? Because we've got all of this like, beautiful color in so much of the world, and all these interesting textures as these leaves change color and dry. The leaves on the grapevine outside my house, they're all different. Like from where I'm sitting right now, I see yellow ones and these ones that are so red they almost glow in the dark. And every day I feel like they're different there. So maybe it's not confidential. Maybe it's not a secret at all. So on this page is the whole range of different types of supplies that I like to have around when I'm art journaling. Confidential stamps from office supplies, vintage stuff, fine, quote unquote, fine art supplies, and more playful or low art supplies. I feel like crayon absolutely can live right next to fine artist material. A little bit more liquid watercolor here. I want to really play with the color that's going on. Sammy must know that we're almost done. She's in there doing my old alarm clock that she has not lived with in over 20 years. It's not quite that long, maybe 15 years, but still. She's making the alarm go off. So that page feels pretty close to done to me. One thing I might go back in and do once this is all the way dry is to accentuate where these wrinkles are, maybe with some of this brighter green, because the green right now feels a little bit out of place, like it needs a little bit more of it. I also am gonna definitely stick this down a little more. And right now there's just the one silver polka dot, so I might find a way to incorporate a little bit more of the silver into this, or else take down the intensity of that silver, I suppose. I will be back home this weekend, so I could play with some silver leaf. When I'm in this phase of a page, I like to kind of look at it and think about possibilities. What else belongs here? And this can be the kind of the hardest thing about art journaling is like when to stop, right? When to stop. And only you know that. And it might be different from page to page. Okay. So I'm gonna make sure to set this way out of the way so that glue can dry. Move this one back into frame a little bit. All right.
Looks
So-
really good. Looks really good.
Thank you for playing with photos today. And one more thing I'll say about photos and like working with photos that maybe feel a little bit more precious. You can absolutely photocopy them, right? Get another print made. The nice thing about a photocopy is it's maybe a little easier to incorporate into your journal, but you know, there's so many different ways that we can recreate photos and then use it in some way in our journal. So it becomes an important part of how we tell our stories, right? We've told our stories with photographs for so long now, and they absolutely can incorporate into our art journal. All right. Thank you all. And Rodney, I see your comment. Yes, I absolutely can. I can play more with, I'm very careful about not taking leaves off of the vineyards themselves, but they're all blowing around now, so I can collect some leaves. All right.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us live. I'm going to stop the recording.
And please share what you create on Mix. I'd love